I'm like, whoa, wouldn't you want to know how to not be sick and not hang out with doctors? I already, by 12, I was quite aware that you were taking away all the fun in your life if you didn't feel good. And so I decided to go off to Cornell to get my nutrition degree and really wasn't interested in telling people how to live their lives or what to eat. So I stayed in academia in public health. I worked with brittle populations in the inner city and in rural communities. And I ended up taking my first serious professional job with the medical school at UNC in the program in integrative medicine housed in the physiatry department. So I hung out in the hospital with physiatrists, and I was sitting on the medical curriculum committee. We were thinking at this stage, this was 1999, that medicine was ready to be thinking about behavior and lifestyle as part of understanding their patients and how to help them. And then after that work there at the program of integrated medicine, I moved on to another medical school for a new department, which is a research department in social and behavioral health, and basically helped my colleagues pull together research projects and do the whole budgets and submission to NIH, and brought in about $24 million in 3 years there. So I've been in the sort of academic side of public health for most of my career, and I was eating perfectly my whole life. Miss Vegetable, Miss Gardener, Miss Goody Two Shoes, Miss Nutritionist. And I had all these health problems that culminated in 2010. It was to the point where I had to quit my job.
Hmm.
I was bleeding to death with small fibroids. I was literally stuck in a bathroom for a whole day. I needed iron IVs. It was really serious. I had
Mhm.
severe back problems and severe fatigue, mental and physical fatigue. And it turned out that not only did I need a total hysterectomy and had to get rid of everything, there was undiagnosed endometriosis going on with loose blood in the pelvis and scarring on the colon and just way too much drama. And I was very fatigued and not able to return to work after that.
Mhm.
So my endocrinologist sent me to the sleep lab. And it turned out my brain was waking up 29 times an hour, which would explain why I was so disabled, not tolerating exercise, not being able to focus and read. And it took another 3 years of trying to figure out what toxicity was affecting my brain, because they all say it's endotoxemia, you've got SIBO or something like that, and that's the reason. Well, I had the symptoms of SIBO. I had the bloating, the belching, the discomfort, the IBS, the, mess. But it turned out all along that it's been my healthy diet. I had arthritis through my 20s. I had to leave Cornell for bilateral foot surgery. I had sesamoidectomies and other fancy stuff trying to save my big toe joints. And that was terrible. I spent basically a decade on crutches, wheelchairs, and painkillers. And it turns out it was all connected to eating beet greens, Swiss chard, sweet potato stuff that I was taught we're supposed to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a quite, and then kind of, this discussion is talking about oxalates and understanding. And for a lot of listeners, this is the first time I've heard about it. I know our food supply is contaminated and it's, very unhealthy. But could you explain what oxalates are and why they're significant, common misconceptions?
Yeah, so we think of most contaminants as man-made or, heavy metals, glyphosate and mold, aflatoxin. Those are the kind of things we worry about in food. And of course, then there's all the factory production where solvents and high heat processing and turns it into just garbage. So we're worried about, oh, you shouldn't eat so much garbage. And by the way, fat, salt, and sugar are terrible. And we are completely missing the boat with nature. There's natural chemicals in plants that make them toxic. That's why you can't eat just any old plant. You have to go to the store. If you could eat any old plant, you go sit in your front yard and eat the bushes and you'd be fine. But you can't do that because most plants have lots of natural chemicals in them that are toxic. And one that we eat way too much of because it's still in the produce department is oxalic acid, and it salts the oxalates.
Uh, and what are would move on to health impacts and systems, and what are some signs and symptoms of oxalate overload, and how can it affect our overall health, and share any surprising less known effects of oxalate overload?
Well, the Oxalic acid part of the oxalates, there's crystals and acid in the foods, and the acid gets into your bloodstream in the 8-10 hours post meal, and it peaks about 4 hours. So you might start to see symptoms at 4 hour mark, but we've got research that suggests you've already destroyed your circulating immune cells, and you've already destroyed your circulating immune cells in 40 minutes. They're throwing out cytokines and going, "Hey, I'm damaged." They're not very good at fighting infection. We've got some initial research showing that. So oxalates creating oxidative stress, damaging immune cells, vascular tissues elsewhere. They're using up glutathione in the liver because your hepatic circulation delivers all the oxalate you absorb straight to the liver. And the poor liver is busy defending itself and making more oxalate because it is a metabolic byproduct of the breakdown of connective tissue. So your liver adds a little more oxalate, then it goes straight up into your heart and the lungs and heart. So you're hitting major critical organs pretty quickly after a meal. And you're also reducing the amount of calcium and other minerals that you absorb from your food. You're potentially starting to chelate calcium, magnesium, and iron out of the blood, creating electrolyte imbalances. It's causing cellular membrane damage, and it starts to form crystals in areas, especially where there's injury, infection, or inflammation. Wherever you have little vacuoles and cell debris, it precipitates out and starts forming nanocrystals, which can grow into microcrystals. And you start getting a sort of asbestosis type particular pollution forming in your thyroid gland, your mouth, your sinuses, all over the place.
And then kind of moving on is these dietary changes and food choices. And we'll talk about your book, Toxic Superfoods. You discuss making simple food swaps to reduce intake and provide some examples and how these can lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, so it's surprising. There's really just probably in your diet, maybe 5 items that are probably too high in oxalate. And that can be things like sweet potatoes, almonds, cashews, spinach, Swiss chard, beet greens. Now, busy doctors tend to not eat that stuff because there's nobody cooking for them. But if you're snacking on nuts and chocolate, dark chocolate is another one. Turmeric tea and whole root turmeric thrown into everything. These are problems. And if you just find low oxalate alternatives, so in the greens, any of the lettuces are low, arugula is low, the cabbage family vegetables are low, watercress is low. There's plenty of other things to eat. Don't be eating potato chips, and potatoes are pretty high, but you can switch over to the little red skin potatoes. It's like minor changes. I had to switch from sweet potatoes to winter squash. They're both orange, they're both vegetables, they both require the oven. It isn't that hard. And that's what it took to get rid of the sweet potatoes and the Swiss chard once or twice a week. I regained my ability to sleep in a week.
Wow.
And then my feet got better for the first time in 30 years. And we see this with people getting over vulvodynia, eye styes, chronic pain in Charlie horses, nighttime urination, frozen shoulder, fatigue, constipation, floaters, depression, anxiety. These things can start clearing up fairly quickly because there's an acute toxicity. But that doesn't address the chronic toxicity. If you've been eating these kinds of foods, growing up on peanuts and chocolate and potatoes, and you've been eating them for decades, you have not just the acute toxicity following the exposure from each meal, but you have a chronic problem with this, bioaccumulation in these crystals and tissues.
Yeah. We're kind of wrapping it up, and your research seems to challenge a lot of traditional advice regarding certain superfoods. And what's been the response? I know we actually have a couple of colleagues, physician colleagues in common. And how do you see work influencing future dietary guidelines?
Oh, wow. Dietary guidelines. It would be nice if we could just get some colleagues in research and in academic medicine interested in paying attention to this and start using I have a basic clinical tool looking at exposure and symptoms. And if you could just screen your patients with the nursing intake process and start noticing in your clinic, that would be nice. And at least get the news in practice moving ahead, because research is part of my career and part of my heart and soul. I would love us to be designing studies with our chronic pain lists and so on and see what we can do for people. Because unfortunately, people are in danger right now because the trends are encouraging high exposure to this very serious cellular toxin. And in medicine, we've been miseducated and in nutrition we're told it's just the kidneys and nothing else.
Yeah.
That's not the case.
Yeah. I think medical education can use a little bit of an upgrade. And yeah, that's a discussion for another day. And tell people about how they can find you, your work, look at toxic superfoods, and find out more about you.
Yes, I have a website, sallyknorton.com, and you can reach us there, email me there, whatever. There's lots of free information there. That's where you can find that intake form. That's just a survey of exposure and risk factors and so on. You can find me on Instagram at sknorton.com. I have or sknorton, and then I have a second one that's toxic superfoods _oxalate _book. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm around.
Yeah.
So reach out and check it out and look at the reviews on Amazon. There's a lot of people are sharing their personal recovery stories and writing little love letters about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing, you've built a humongous social media following based on your expertise. And I think it's really interesting, and all of the resources. Check out Sally's book on Amazon. That'll be in the show notes. And with that, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate it.